With you today. Today is July 5th. We're excited about what God is doing in this season. July 5th, the day after Independence Day. I hope you guys had a great time on yesterday. I'm sure we were all locked up in the house, not doing any social distancing. I did hear about some virtual social distancing parties. There were some people that sent me pictures of barbecue on today. Shame on you. You know who you are. Uh, but we have a great Sunday planned today. So what I want you to do is the first thing, I want you to take the next step, be a part of what we're doing. We have to take the next step link. We love for you to be a part of what's going on here in the Love community. The other thing I'd love for you to do, consider it a great honor if you will participate in what's going on here at the Love community, True Love Christian Church of Humble. If you would give to what God is doing in this house, in this season, we'd be greatly appreciative of you walking and coming alongside of us. So this week, we're so excited. Yesterday, we were a part of on July 4th, we were out serving. And I think that's one of the responsibilities of being a Christian is to serve. And so we went out and we served, and we spent some time with Sheila Jackson Lee and the testing center at A.W. Jones Elementary.
Councilman Cunningham was there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Councilman Charles Cunningham was there. Shout out to him for inviting us to be a part. Great day, great time. If you missed it, stay tuned. Follow our pages and follow me. It was announced in our group. So if you are a part of that, you would have got that. So be a part. But we just celebrated July 4th, and during the context of this year, everything that's going on from the George Floyd case, we've seen some things happen. Ahmaud Arbery situation, Breonna Taylor situation. It really kind of puts 4th of July in a different light. What would you say?
Very much. 4th of July is celebrating the freedom of our country. July 4th, 1776 began the celebration of July 4th as Independence Day. Yes. We were finally free from Great Britain, and our people, the American people, felt that it was like the birth of a new nation. We were people who were created for equality, and we were a nation built on the principles and the practices of the true and living God.
Exactly. And the foresight that our forefathers had to consider God and consider building our nation on those principles is such an awesome thing. I mean, it's such a wonderful thing. However, this year has kind of showed us that we haven't truly, fully lived out the context of what our forefathers wrote in that declaration. As Dr. Martin Luther King said in the I Have a Dream speech, that they've come to cash a check that has not been cashed yet. And I feel as a part of this year, it hasn't quite been cashed yet. And it's something that we've been going through for a long time. As a matter of fact, Frederick Douglass, I saw on my feed a lot of Frederick Douglass posts. He had a speech that he gave on July 5th, the day after 4th of July, and it basically said that we are not free, and that was over 160 years ago, and the speech really resonates today. Would you agree?
True. I am so glad you sent me that feed. I read it. I feasted on it.
Yeah.
And I just have to say that to hear him deliver this speech is no different than what we're going through here in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It's just, oh, I can't understand it, because our country was based on liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and the fact that all men were created
Created equal.
equal. And when you talk about this thing in 1852, what he was talking about was the fact that there was a need for freedom, there was a need for liberty,
Yeah.
there was a need for citizenship.
Yeah.
And these are the same topics that are being discussed even right now. And only a few years, matter of fact, about 9 years after he gave this great rhetorical speech, and it was greatly acclaimed and talked about and published, in 1861, we went into a civil war over the same issues. And now in 2020, we're still struggling with the same issues.
Same issues.
So I would have to agree with Dr. King and say the check is still just a promissory note.
Yeah, it's really indicative of where we are. The things that have happened in the last few months have really just kind of shined a light on that. And Frederick Douglass basically said he doesn't celebrate 4th of July because it's really he really feels like the country is stuck. And from Frederick Douglass' day to Martin Luther King's day, the country was still unstuck, because after we came out of the civil rights era, we started this process of systemic racism and systemic oppression, where it wasn't overt, but it was a lot of times it was overt and covert. And so we're living in the midst of this. And as I believe, as people of God, we've got to get to a place where we really stress unity in our communities. We really have to stress, because I don't believe that it's just a black-white issue anymore. I've talked to several white pastors and white friends, and they really want to be a part in eradicating racism during this time. So I think it's a unique season for us in the fact that there are leaders of churches that want to speak out, that want to have a voice, and that want to stand up and do what's right. But it just seems that the country is stuck, and we've got to get to a place where we're unstuck so that we can heal from what we got. Yeah.
These type of issues, I would not say that they cannot exist, but I would say that they should not exist in view of the church.
Yeah.
The church says we are all God's people. We are all created in his likeness and his image. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus. And so there's only one race, that's the human race. And so we are created to serve him, to glorify him. And so when we have these kind of issues that permeate in our life, then my question, and I think what resonates throughout all of this, is where is the church? And if the church is the church, how can this be? Because that's the argument that Frederick Douglass raised in 1852.
Yeah.
And we're still raising that same argument in 2020. So once again, Christianity was important in what he was speaking of. And so he was saying, he wasn't just talking about, but he was talking about those of us who call ourselves believers, and we're Christians, we're born again, we're full of the Spirit, and we want to do the things that are pleasing in the sight of God. We used to have these bracelets a long time ago saying WWJD. So what would Jesus do? So my question today is still, what would Jesus do?
What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? I believe that is a significant question to ask, and I believe that as we ask that significant question, then we've got to put strategy behind the question. I believe one of the big key things is that it's hard for us to truly see our brother because of our forefathers. When you know that redlining existed, Jim Crow laws existed, these types of things were designed to divide people and keep people separated. And so this was a systemic effort to separate and divide. And so now the church has to come to a place where we have a strategic effort to not divide, but strategically come together on an intentional basis to say, enemy, you're not going to get the glory. God is going to get the glory in this story. We're going to make sure that we come together. So I got to come come together with somebody that doesn't look like me. I've got to eat lunch with somebody that doesn't talk like me. I've got to spend time with brothers and sisters that don't maybe even have the same ideology of me. Because if we've been divided and separated, it's really hard for us to see things from one another's perspective. And we got to get to a place where I might watch Fox News and somebody else might watch ABC News, or somebody else might watch CNN, and they all have varying viewpoints, but we can still come together and see the God in the story. Whereas I don't just objectify people and place people in buckets and place people over here and just say, this is what you get in this story, this is what you get here, this is what you get here. I really look to find the commonality in all people, because I believe all people want to be educated. I believe all people want to be respected. I believe all people want to be treated with dignity. I believe all people want their kids to have an equal education, and we all want equal representation. And so with that, these are key things that we all can agree on, but we have to make sure that we take the next step into making that a reality.
It's funny you would say that, because what I was thinking was this whole idea of celebrating freedom. That's what this day is about. We celebrate our freedom. Yet the United States of the whole world has 25% of the incarcerated people are in the United States. That's people that are locked away and have no freedom. When we look at the systemic things that are happening in our society, we're taking away people's freedom, and yet we are here today to celebrate freedom. And yes, we're free. One, because Jesus set us free.
That's right.
He paid the ultimate price. He gave his life as a ransom for us. And yet we quote freedom, we talk freedom, but are we willing as a people to pay the price for freedom?
That's it. That's it. That's it. Well, we've kind of come to the end. We're getting ready. We got a great message for you entitled Unstuck. I'd like for you to stick around and hear about how the healing begins, how the healing starts. And first, before we go there, we want to play a snippet of Frederick Douglass's great-grandchildren reading his speech on July 5th. What was the title of it again?
As a slave, what do I celebrate, or what does July 4th mean to me?
What does July 4th mean to me? And great speech, not very long, but I want you to hear from Frederick Douglass's great-grandchildren. And after that, I'll be back to give you a word to help us get unstuck and move in the right direction. I want to also say, as we get ready to do that, on next week, we're going to start a sermon series entitled, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Won't You Be My Neighbor? And so we're going to be talking about that for the rest of July. Will you be my neighbor? Won't you be my neighbor? If you understand and you've watched Mr. Rogers from a time or two, tell somebody, bring them along. And we're going to talk about that and how we can bring healing to the land and move forward arm in arm and being neighbors together. So real quick, we're going to show you Frederick Douglass and his great-grandkids, and I hope you'll be blessed by this.
Do I look there or there? Okay. My name is Alexa Ann Watson, and I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of Frederick Douglass.
Is my great-great-great-great.
Great-great-great-granddaughter of Frederick Douglass.
I am the great-great-great-grandchild. I've been counting on my fingers since I was like 5.
This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom.
Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men. And if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment.
With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence?
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us?
I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary.
Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me.
The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
You may rejoice, I must mourn. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed.
Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke.
For it is not light that is needed, but fire.
It is not the gentle shower, but thunder.
We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
The feeling of the nation must be quickened.
The conscience of the nation must be roused.
The propriety of the nation must be startled.
The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed.
And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim.
To him, your celebration is a sham.
Your boasted liberty an unholy license.
Your national greatness, swelling vanity.
Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless.
Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence.
Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery.
Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings,
with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him
mere bombast,
fraud,
deception,
impiety,
and hypocrisy. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country.
So glad that you have decided to stay with us today. Wasn't that a great tribute to Frederick Douglass? And as we get to that, I want to invite you to like, click, share, or follow us during this time as we get ready to go into the text. We're in John chapter 5, and it says this. After this, there was a festival of the Jews. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. Jesus saw him lying there. He knew he had been there a long time, and he said, "Do you want to be made well?" And the sick man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. This text gives us a picture of someone that is stuck. This text gives us a picture of someone who's grappling with the realities of life, where I'm looking at my future, but seem to be paralyzed by my past. I don't know if anybody here has been in that place, but as we celebrate the 4th of July, it seems like as a country we have been caught in the crosshairs of paralysis. And it's in that I read an excerpt from the book, Notes of a Native Son, and it reads like this. It says this: on the 29th day of July 1943, my father died. On the same day, a few hours later, his last child was born. Over a month before this, while all our energies were concentrated in waiting for these events to happen, there had been in Detroit one of the bloodiest race riots of the century. A few hours after my father's funeral, while he lay in state in an undertaker's chapel, a race riot broke out in Harlem. On the morning of the 3rd of August, we drove my father to the graveyard through a wilderness of smashed plate glass. I had not known him very well. We had gotten along very badly, partly because we shared different fashions, the view, and we both had stubborn pride. He had lived and died in an intolerable bitterness of spirit, and it frightened me as we drove to the graveyard through those unquiet, ruined streets to see how powerful and overflowing this bitterness could be, and to realize this bitterness was mine now. That's an excerpt from the book, Notes of a Native Son. It's basically talking about the relationship between a father and a son. The father had to deal with the civil rights movement, as the father had to deal with being stuck between seeing a positive future and having to grapple with a negative past. The father is so caught up in the situation that he couldn't see future possibilities and basically died bitter without realizing his full potential to heal. This is a classic literary portrait of a son and a father needing to heal, but the things around them and the culture around them would keep them paralyzed. This story also lets me know that healing needs to happen not only physically, but it also needs to happen spiritually and emotionally as well. Gives us a real good picture of how we as people need to heal. And if we need to heal, we've got to understand what it is that we've got to do to heal. And that is, first, we've got to become unstuck. I've got to get to a place where I'm not stuck in the hold of bitterness. I'm not stuck in the hold of my excuses. I'm not stuck in the hold of anything that would keep me from being who God would have me to become. I've got to get to a place where my spiritual issues propel me to be greater and stronger as God would have me to be. I can't become paralyzed, because I believe that if I'm going to be who God has me to be, I've got to find the grace place. I've got to focus on the gospel, and I've got to finish with grace. As I look at this text, the text says, after there was a festival of the Jews, Jesus went to Jerusalem. And he's talking about, he's going to Jerusalem. It's his second trip to Jerusalem. And he's there in a place where there are people that are invalids. He's there in a place where there are people who are cast out. He's there in a place where there are people who are looked down upon. He's there in a place where people may not have the best advantages, but because he's there, all possibilities abound. It's in this text. When you find grace, you must understand that when finding grace means that what I found is unmerited favor. So it doesn't matter what I don't have, because I'm in the presence of possibilities with Jesus. I must understand that sanctification takes place when Jesus is present. So if I'm in the place where grace is possible, I've got to be looking for sanctification. So basically what I got to do is I've got to find a sanctified place. This in the text, they are in a position where they are celebrating the Passover. They are celebrating their corporate deliverance. They are celebrating the fact that they are no longer in slavery anymore. They are celebrating the fact that God has delivered them. Basically, this text is saying that this was their 4th of July celebration. This is the 4th of July celebration, and everybody isn't celebrating because there are some people that are so bogged down by their situations and circumstances that it wasn't a celebration. It was a situation that needed God in the midst of it. And it says in the text that as they celebrated the Passover, the water would be stirred. As celebration is happening, there became a supernatural possibility. Didn't I just tell you grace comes and possibilities abound? When you see this in the text, as they're celebrating the Passover, we see that as they celebrated, people left their circumstances and walked into the next level of living. I like that because it lets me know that Galatians 2:20 really is true in what it says. And it says, I've been crucified with Christ, that I no longer live, but Christ lives within me. That means I don't have to carry around what I'm carrying because it's Christ in me that lives. And he says, this life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. This is Jesus. If we're going to truly understand who Jesus is, how Jesus is, why Jesus is, we must understand that it comes from the context of him taking the place of humility to serve me. Even in this text, there are people who don't have the best advantages, but because of who Jesus is, he shows up to serve. So you got to ask yourself this question: if you're going to say, what would Jesus do? If I'm going to serve like Jesus served me, I've got to ask myself these two questions. First, am I stagnant? Because in this text, we see there are some people that are stagnant, and then we see some people that are getting delivered. There are some people that are stagnant, and there are some people that are getting delivered. There are some people that stay invalids. There are some people that stay blind. There are some people that stay lame, and there are some people that stay in a paralyzed state around you. But there are also some people that do get delivered. And so the question today is, am I stagnant? Every church, every person, every believer should have people that they aim to serve. And so how do I answer that question? Who am I serving today? Who am I serving? As we go each week, we're serving. And so there's an opportunity to serve. And so God is looking for us to serve, but some of us can't serve others because we're stuck in our situationships. We're stuck in some situations that keep us locked in and locked down so that we can't see what it is that God would have us to see. We've got people who serve, but we've got people who swerve. That's what happened in Luke chapter 10 in the text with the Good Samaritan. We're going to be dealing with that in the next couple of weeks. We see there's people who serve, and then we see the Good Samaritan serving, and then we see some people swerving. Jesus makes the Samaritan a hero. Why? To prove a point that people needs are greater than people preferences. People needs are greater than people preferences. So if I'm getting to a place where I'm looking for sanctification, I've got to ask myself, am I stagnant? Am I stuck? Once I know the answer, the positive answer, that I've got to find sanctified people. That means those are the people that serve, that they connect, they take the next step. We connect with God. We connect with his people. We connect with our small groups on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We connect on Sundays. We connect and we look for opportunities to serve. Maybe we can't get out, but we pick up the phone and we connect out because we understand that even though there is a pandemic going on, my responsibility is to serve, and serve from the perspective of I'm looking for salvific possibilities. And when you look for salvific possibilities, everywhere you turn, you understand that grace is possible. Everywhere you turn, even though the story doesn't look good, I know that grace is possible. Did you know that when citizens travel overseas, they need a passport? And to enter into another country, as a matter of fact, Europe for the first time this past week said that we couldn't go in even with the passport. But the passport must be stamped, giving the person access to the country. Basically, what it's saying is no passport, no entrance. And so in order to enter heaven, a person must have a passport stamped with the blood of Christ. And the only way you get that passport stamped with the blood of Christ is that you've got to have faith in Christ. And when you have faith in Christ, Jesus gives you faith, but it's also tied to works. It's not just about works, but faith without works is what? It's dead. But I'm not just focused on faith and works, but I've got to focus on the grace of the gospel. Look at this text. It says, when Jesus saw him lying there, and he knew he had been lying there, he says, do you want to be made well? I really want to picture that as a picture of grace, because this is a conversation that this man doesn't even deserve. This is a picture of somebody being paused by situations and circumstances, and has gotten to the place where they're no longer even trying to get better. They're no longer even looking for solutions. They're no longer even searching for answers. And Jesus still meets him right there at his knees. Isn't that a great place to know that even when I'm at my worst, Jesus is still looking for me? Jesus is still ready to extend grace to me. And as we see this, we see not only Jesus coming down through Galilee the second time, we see the power of the gospel. And when the power of the gospel shows up, it always deals in our infirmities. It always deals in our limitations. It always deals in our weakness, because the word of God says, when I am weak, guess what? That's when he is strong. I want to help you to understand this one thing. The gospel's potential is married to the gospel's power. Did you hear what I just told you? The gospel's potential is married to the gospel's power. So once I get my passport, and once I say I'm going to focus in on the gospel, then my potential gets married to his power. And so the gospel, when you get married to his power, there is no excuse for your excuse. You got to understand that the gospel, when you truly get involved in who Jesus is and what he's doing, he always exposes me. And when he exposes me, he exposes my excuses. I like this, because he meets a man stagnant for 38 years. Jesus has been coming to the temple his whole life, and I'm sure he's passed by this man several times, and I'm sure he saw this man a few times. But today he says, not today. You're not going to stay in this place. If you want to get well, you can best believe that I've got the power to help you, but you've got to have the faith to believe. Basically, Jesus said, I've got the power. You've got to meet me halfway. When I take one step, Jesus takes another. He stops to expose the paralysis. The question is today, do you want to get well? Do you really, truly want to get well? Well, Jesus, of course, he wants to get made well. I mean, of course, who doesn't want to get healed? But you've got to not just say it. You got to believe it. And a lot of times we say stuff that we don't necessarily believe. And so Jesus wants to challenge him. And so what he does is he responds to him with facts. He tells it so fast that he probably put his sad face on, because this man is so used to being the victim that he's already had his answer rehearsed. And he starts going into this diatribe about why he can't get in the water. And Jesus is not even dealing with that. He's trying to help him to understand it could all be so simple if he just believed in the power of who God is. I believe that's how Jesus responds to us today. I believe Jesus is telling us today, it could all be so simple, but we just rather make it hard. Loving you is like a battle, and we both end up with stars. Tell me who I have to be to get some reciprocity. He's basically trying to get us to understand the lame man, the paralyzed man, to understand that if you just believe, I've got the power. But a lot of times we don't have the power because we haven't focused on the gospel. When we focus on the gospel, not only does it expose my excuses, it elevates my expectations. Because once I see my excuse tied to my expectations, when my expectations change, my life changes. When my expectations change, my conversations change. When my expectations change, I can't be who I used to be. When my expectations change, I'm not comfortable being the victim because my expectations have changed and I'm focused on the power of the gospel. And now I've got to understand that today I am the victor. And so today I walk toward my victory. Why? Because I exist to persist. I'm walking toward college because I exist to persist. I'm walking out of the coronavirus because I exist to persist. I'm walking into my next level of ministry and blessing because I exist to persist, because I'm focused on the gospel and I'm focused on the power of who Jesus Christ is. And you must stand on something for God to use you mightily. Did you know that? We went on a road trip this past week. We did a road trip edition on last Sunday. We traveled over 6,000 miles in the car. And one of the last stops that we made was in the city of San Francisco. And if you've never been, San Francisco is a beautiful place to live, a beautiful place to visit. And as we stopped in San Francisco, we saw the Golden Gate Bridge. And as I was looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, I looked back over and I saw this rock in the middle of the lake. And that rock was the site of the former prison called Alcatraz. Alcatraz is a prison that they put people in so that they could not escape. Basically, when you went to Alcatraz, you were stuck there until the ending of your sentence. And so you were close enough to see the beautiful life in San Francisco, but you were living in a living hell every single day. And as I looked over at Alcatraz from where I was sitting, I'm looking at the Golden Gate Bridge and I'm thinking about how beautiful the city is, but I wonder what it must have been like to be in prison and having one of the worst prisons in the world, but yet being able to see one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I believe that's kind of like how that man was in life. To see Jesus passing by, to see people getting healed for 38 years must have felt like he was in a spiritual prison. And a lot of times we live in spiritual prisons because we get imprisoned by our excuses. We get imprisoned by our expectations. We get imprisoned by our perspective. And when we get imprisoned by that, we lose sight of the grace that God has and so, that we so richly deserve. Yeah, we don't deserve it, but guess what? Because of who Jesus is, he gives us the opportunity to receive grace if we just believe. And that's why he shows up in the text and he says, stand up, take your mat and walk. And listen at this. When he decided that he was going to stand up and live for something, when he decided he was going to take up something that used to provide him comfort, that habit that used to keep him bound, those things that used to keep him outside of the presence of God, he decided to walk up into another level of blessing. And when you focus on grace, I promise you, God will allow you to see the mission that he has for your life. Check this out. He says, as he saw the mission, he got up and he started moving in the direction that Jesus had told him to go in. And as he was moving in the direction, he began to get excited. His spirit got quickened on the inside because of what Jesus had done and what Jesus had spoke into his life. Jesus just spoke to him and told him to stand up, take up your mat and walk, because he knows that he needs to participate in the deliverance. And so when he sees the mission, he walks, but Jesus sees him a little while later. And he says, he finds him in the temple and said to him, see, now you are well. I want you to follow the mission. Check out what the mission is. Sin no more. Hallelujah. I believe that's all of our struggle in life, is to get to a place where we invite grace in, but go to the place where we struggle and we strive to sin no more. I believe this is the place where he was. He was shouting about his deliverance and he was shouting about his future. He wasn't talking about what he had done. He was talking about where he was going. When you understand that and you truly see the mission that God has for your life, you begin to seize the mission that God has put you in. When you seize what God has for you, you walk into the assignment undeterred by people. You got to understand that when he got blessed, people started talking. When he turned his situation around, people had a problem. When he got up and he wasn't dependent on anybody else, guess what? People had problems with it. But as long as you focus on the gospel, as long as you continue to talk to Jesus, as long as Jesus is your everything, I promise you, you won't be stuck in the situations that you've been stuck in. I promise you, you won't be stuck in the situations that used to take you out, that used to turn you down. But because of who Jesus is, I promise you, Jesus gives us a greater look into our situation. I promise you that. But check this out. As we started the sermon, we talked about an excerpt from Notes of a Native Son. That portion of the book, it was a book written by James Baldwin. James Baldwin wrote this book, and he's talking about the fact that his own father had struggled with bitterness. He said he lived his whole life as a bitter man. His father was a charismatic preacher. His father was a charismatic pastor. But because of the effects of the civil rights movement, because of the fact that when he walked out of his neighborhood, he felt less than a man. When he came home bitter, and he passed that bitterness on to his son. And when he passed it on to his son had a choice either to embrace the bitterness or use that story to tell and allow God to get some glory out of this situation. And because of that, he took the pain that he had and began to put the pen to the paper. When he put the pen to the paper, people like Martin Luther King were inspired by his penmanship. People like Malcolm X were inspired by his penmanship. People like author Toni Morrison were inspired by his penmanship. And although he had a bad situation, it was turned into a greater revelation of who God is in the midst of the struggle. Amen. And so you might have a struggle today, but it might just be that you are the catalyst to change the next generation. You have a struggle today, but it might just be that as soon as you get unstuck, you might be the catalyst to spark change in your neighborhood. You don't have to have a lot. You just have to have a desire to walk into the presence of God and say, God, here's what I have to offer you. And when I offer you what I have, Jesus takes the worst of me and turns it into the best of me. So the question is today is, who wants to be unstuck? Who truly wants to be unstuck? Who really wants to walk into what it is that God would have for you? Walk into the grace that God so richly provides, to live according to the plans that God so richly has laid out for us today. Who is that wants that? If that's you, we want to pray with you. We want to pray with you. We want you to take the next step. Take the next step. Go to the link and click take the next step. Fill out the link. We want to pray with you. We thank God for those of you who have taken the next step in the past few weeks. We are so excited. We want to encourage you to keep taking the next step. We want you to connect. We want you to grow. We want you to serve. And we want you to lead. Because in this time, we need leadership. We need the people of God to stand on the word of God, to experience the power of God. So we need people to come together of all races, of all economic backgrounds, and say, I want God to use me so that he can get the glory in my story. So glad to bring this word to you today. You guys be blessed. Until next week, see you. Thank you for joining in with us this morning. We are so glad that you were here. Listen, hope you had a great 4th of July, pop firecrackers or whatever, enjoyed family. That's the most important thing, that we enjoy family. In this tough time, we're praying with you. We're praying for you. Let us know if we could pray for you, if we could help you in any way. We want to be there with you, for you, and we want to walk the walk with you. At True Love Christian Church and the Love Community, we want to walk with you. We live life together. And with that being said, we want to encourage you to take the next step. On Tuesday, Thursdays, we have our small groups. We'd like for you to be a part of our small group. Go at the end of this video, you'll see a link, a page. At the top, you'll see a page. At the bottom, you'll see a page on YouTube. And We'd like for you to just be a part. Be a part of one of our small groups, of one of our life groups on Tuesday or Thursday. Tuesday is the ladies, Thursday is the men's, and we love for you to be a part. So from this 4th of July edition, we're so glad that you came. Let the fireworks go off in your life as you see a fireworks of possibilities that God is getting ready to release his power. So my prayer for you is that you get unstuck and allow God to move mightily in your life. Be blessed.